If you will, turn to Joshua 24. I'll be reading the scripture. Read Joshua 24, 14 and 15. Now, fear the Lord and serve him with all faithfulness. Throw away the gods your ancestors worship beyond the Euphrates River and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. But if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your ancestors served beyond the Euphrates, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are living. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord.
Well, good morning once again to everyone here. Thank you for reading that scripture, Daryl. And we talked a little bit last week about why this scripture was being brought up again. And actually, I didn't even realize, has this been up for a while? I didn't know that this was on the board I didn't realize it until this Sunday. And maybe that's kind of why that was planted in my mind. But as I was trying to figure out a Father's Day lesson, and this scriptures kept on popping in my mind, and really was trying to examine why that was. And there's a lot of exciting things about this verse, in these couple of verses that Daryl read for us this morning. One thing that I've noticed, that whenever someone reads this, and Daryl was another demonstration, and Ron last week, it seems like when we get over to verse 15, there's just something that gets into us when we say, but for me and my family, we will serve the Lord. There's something motivational about it. It's something exciting. And we went ahead and read chapter 24 last week. And what we're going to do is we're going to examine a little bit through this series, probably just this week and next week. We're going to look why this is so exciting, why what he said actually means something. We talked last week about how when someone gets up and says something and there's not really a lot of, you're able to say a lot of things, but whether it holds weight or not is more about how you live your life and the things that you do. I can get up here and say that I am an amazing three-point shooter in basketball, but when you take me to the court and you put a hand in my face, I'm probably going to miss it most of the time. So when Joshua told the people, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord, in the way that moved them, in the way that motivated them, there was something there. Now, the entire book of Joshua is written about Joshua's life. And not only that, but the taking of the land of Canaan. But I have a couple points today, a couple points looking back at his life, and what we're trying to apply this to, really it's about applying it to be a leader. But in turn, because last week was Father's Day, I wanted to apply a couple points on how to be a good father. Now obviously I'm just getting started in that, and I know a lot of you who've been there, done that, probably can have a few other things to add. But I'm not really going out about it on that route. We're looking at what Scripture has to say about what a good leader is. And we're looking at a man's life and drawing some points from his life that show why he was such a good leader and why he could make this statement. We talked a little bit last week about how can you make a statement? You can make that statement for yourself. You can say, no, I will serve the Lord. But how can a man make this statement more broad than that? It doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem like, well, how can you make that for your wife? How can you make that statement for your household? And we talked a little bit about the fact that, we all have free will. But the way that this man lived his life, the way that this man taught, the way this man demonstrated his teachings, and the way this man died, and the fact that before his death, he made it a point to go and remind the people of all the things that had happened and remind them to put away the idols. That when he died, there was no doubt within his household of how you should live in the ordinances of God. He did his duty as a father. He taught his children, he taught the people around him how to be a man of God. And I believe that's why he has the authority to say what he did. So we're going to look at a couple practical points. The first point is very practical and one that we find in Scripture. And I'm actually going to just go over there just to make sure I don't misquote it. But it's found in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, 11 through 12. And this is something that I think all of us are very familiar with. We talk about this Scripture often. But this Scripture says, and it's kind of taking it away from the rest of the context, so I ask that you also at some point read the whole chapter 4. But we're going to focus on 11 and 12. And make it your ambition to lead a quiet life and attend to your own business, and work with your hands just as we commanded you, so that you will behave properly towards outsiders and not be in any need. So the first point I want to talk about is to live a quiet life that prepares you for leadership. As you read through Scriptures, if you're like me, you see all of these amazing stories, especially in the Old Testament, of these men and women and just people, that these average people that God calls to do amazing things. And then we see the amazing things that they do. We see the miracles. We see the battle exploits. We see the great moments of faith. And even going into the New Testament, the book of Acts, we see all of these things that the apostles were doing. And these high moments that they had, these amazing speeches, these amazing miracles that they were allowed to do at the time. These amazing exploits of faith. But I think it's very easy to forget that these stories that we have in the Bible are probably less than 1% of the life that they lived as a whole. And as I'm thinking about these things, in my mind, I oftentimes can get in this trap of thinking, oh, when that moment comes, I'm going to step up. I'm going to be the man of God that He wants me to be. But then I look at my life and I see all of this idle time, all of this unpreparing that I'm doing. And I want to make it very clear that when you go through Scripture, there's one quality of the person that God asks to be a leader, and it's that they are not idle. When you look through Scripture, these are people that might be untrained. They might be not great warriors. They might be tax collectors, people who betrayed their own people for exploit of money. And yet He called these people, but these people were not sitting around doing nothing. They were people that were working with their hands, that were living a quiet life. Some of them, we know one of the apostles was a warrior, was a zealot. So maybe not always a quiet life, but they were doing something. They were trying, and they were moving. And I'm going to continue that Joshua did not go away from this. We know that later on Joshua became an amazing warrior. He became not necessarily a warrior, but a leader of the people. But it didn't happen overnight. I was not aware. In my study, I think I just kind of overlooked this. But we see something about Joshua in Numbers chapter 11. We're going to have most of our study today in the book of Numbers. So go ahead and turn over to Numbers 11. Next week we'll go into the book of Joshua. But I think you might know where we're going this week, since it's in the book of Numbers. We learn a little something about Joshua. Numbers 11, and there's a lot going on in Numbers 11 and 12. Some crazy stuff is going on with the people. So they're continuing to rebel. They're continuing to be obstinate. We even see the leaders of God's people trying to get on track, and even disagreements between Moses and Aaron that ends in some pretty harsh things, some harsh lessons from God. But we see amongst all of this chaos, we see a little snippet of Joshua. And it's not really a lot said about him. But let's read chapter 11, verses 27 and 28. So a young man ran and told Moses and said, Eldad and Medad are prophesying. That's good names for Father's Day also. So are prophesying in the camp. That was a joke. You can laugh. Please laugh, because I thought it was kind of funny. So in the camp, Medad, Eldad, Father's Day. Then Joshua, the son of Nun, the attendant of Moses from his youth, said, Moses, my Lord, restrain them. But Moses said to him, "Are you jealous for my sake? Would that all the Lord's people were prophets, that the Lord would put his spirit upon them." Then Moses returned to the camp, both he and the elders of Israel. This is the first mention of him. And we see a couple things about him. First of all, he was an attendant of Moses. Now, I don't know all the process of how he got to this point, but Moses saw something in Joshua. He saw something that was, and I don't know what it was, but it says from his youth. Maybe he was offered for this duty from his parents. I don't know, but what I did know is that he devoted himself to learn from the best. And I know that Moses made a lot of mistakes, but Joshua wanted at some point and made the decision that he was going to devote his life to God, and in turn he attended on God's servant. Through this, I'm sure that Joshua saw many great moments. He saw many bad moments through Moses' life and learned many things. But not only that, he was willing to attend to Moses. It seems to me that this, even seeing what he did here, one thing he was very loyal to Moses. He was worried because these other people were prophesying. But also, he was willing to run back and forth. He did all the dirty work, it seems like. He was willing to get his hands dirty for the work of the Lord. I'm going to contend to you that if you want to be a leader, if you want to be a father, you need to get your hands dirty. The first point was to live a life to prepare for leadership. He spent his life preparing to be able to make the statement, "As for me and my family, my household, we will serve the Lord." That's a lot of little things that leads to that moment. A lot of little prayers, a lot of sacrifices, a lot of giving up the things that you want for yourself to get to that point. We hear often, at least I did growing up, that when you become a father or mother, or even when you get married, you mature quickly. And there is truth to this thought. I think probably one of the biggest reasons is that you quickly come to realize that the world doesn't revolve around you when you're married. And also, you come to realize that really quickly when you have a child. But I'm going to contend to you, and we hear this a lot. I'm sure you've all heard this many times, but I'm going to contend to you that just becoming married and just getting married and becoming a father does not make you mature. And if it did, we'd probably have a lot less irresponsible parents in the world, and a lot less divorce, and a lot less irresponsible marriages in the world. Because what we do before marriage, what we do before we become parents, is so important. I can say through my own experience that those struggles that I had, those idle moments that I've had, those